Hey, I'm live. YouTube is working at this crazy hour. And that's amazing. That's freaking amazing. Of course, it's the middle of the night. It's quarter after 2 in the morning here. So I'm not really expecting people to tune in, but you never know. Let's see. Um, YouTube has not let me stream live for quite some time. It just tells me live streaming is not available because they're so busy. So I thought I'd try the middle of the night since my sleep schedule is totally off. Let me see if I can share the link on Facebook. You see, I fell asleep. Uh, I took a nap in the afternoon and woke up at like 1:30 in the morning. And so I didn't share the link on Facebook because I wasn't sure that eh, that YouTube would let me on. And once I've started streaming, I don't see a way to share. I don't know what all these buttons on YouTube mean. I'm still learning. But apparently, the link in my no, the link I get is for the dashboard. I can't share that. Sorry for all the coughing. Anyway, looks like I have one loyal listener. That's good. Of course, I can't remember a whole lot, but I've been spending most of my time working on my latest book, The X in Exegesis. It makes my brain hurt. I've had to explore, of course, the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, and on a site whose name I keep forgetting, Zebrapedia, they have images of many of Philip K. Dick's handwritten notes. I've actually deciphered some of them. His handwriting was atrocious. And wow. And I have a copy of the published exegesis, which a friend bought for me some time back. Oh, it makes my brain hurt. And even though I was there when a great deal of this exegesis was written, it's still, what in the world is under my foot? It's still very slow going. It's like wading through mud. to find little treasures. These are just Phil's notes, letters to friends and colleagues, handwritten notes. He never wrote the finished manuscript. He never really came to a solid conclusion, which is much like his science fiction novels. They end, but they don't really tell you what is real. They just keep asking what is real and what is human. My hair isn't too bad this week. Yeah, there's a lot of gray still, but some of it's brown again. The gray is shedding out, but in a week or so, the brown will shed out and I'll be all gray again. I just don't feel like dyeing my hair right now. I'm really tired of being isolated, and I'm basically a hermit, but usually there's activity out there, and stores are open, and I can go get my hair cut if I want. Once in a while, I make a ponytail and snip off the ends, but it's still awfully long for summer. Anyway, the exegesis, Phil keeps coming back to Gnosticism. And remember, at the time, from 1974 to 1982, when Phil was writing about Gnosticism, we didn't really know a lot about it. And we didn't have, of course, internet. And the references Phil would have needed were available only in university libraries. You couldn't find much at your local library. You'd find even less at the local bookstore. And research meant getting up, getting dressed, going somewhere, and spending hours searching for material on your subject. It wasn't something you'd find in the daily newspaper, or you'd find a little bit in some of the monthly magazines like Psychology Today, or even the more general audience magazines. But you really couldn't dig very deep. So Phil relied primarily on things that we had at home, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a good starting point. And he had the big old set of Will and Ariel Durant's books on the history of civilization, going way, way back and coming up to the modern era, which of course was, about 100 years ago. But he got that set for free by joining the Book of the Month Club. And he had some books, about a half a dozen books of the writings, not of the writings, about the writings of early church fathers. But Phil tried to present himself as a Gnostic, but he really didn't understand Gnosticism. He thought of the Trinity, which is a Christian concept, and there were Christian Gnostics in the early centuries of Christianity, but they were considered heretics. And Gnostics did not believe in the Trinity. God is one in Gnosticism. And not only that, God, the one, doesn't care about you and probably doesn't know that you exist, But Phil sees God as coming down and cleaning up the corruption in this world, uh, getting rid of evil and suffering. Now, from my point of view, yes, God could end all suffering right now in an instant, but he'd have to kill us all because we cause so much suffering in this world. I don't think I'd like that solution. And then there's the idea in Gnosticism that God, the one, this thing, it's not a person, somehow folds itself and um, from itself makes a female part and a male part, and together they produce these emanations. They're also called eons, Aeons, but I guess you can spell it Eons, but they aren't eons in the sense of great lengths of time. They're actually persons with personalities. Different Gnostic systems have different numbers of eons and or emanations and different names for them, but basically they're pairs of male and female emanations from the one. And one of these emanations, usually called Sophia, decides to create a being from herself without the help of her male partner, who is usually called Jesus, by the way. But Jesus is not Christ. There's another emanation called Christ. Anyway, she decides she doesn't want the help of her male counterpart, so she just makes this being all by herself. There's something. Is that a fly? Yeah, it's a fly. Well, it won't be for long. My cat is a fly killer. She'll hunt it to the ends of the earth. Anyway, it's going after the light, the lamp. Poor thing. Um, so Sophia creates this being from herself, and that is the God who creates this world. And he's evil. And he is Yahweh, the creator God. And we suffer in this world because it's an evil world made by an evil God. That's Gnosticism. Phil didn't see it that way. Sorry. I'm not ill. I just cough every morning when I wake up, and right now it's my morning. So, anyway, the way Phil saw it, there is an evil deity, but it isn't as powerful as God. Well, that kind of fits in Gnosticism. But the evil deity is a liar. So when he claims that he created our world, he's lying. He actually damaged this world. Now we knew or had some weird sound. I have to see if I accidentally left the tea kettle on. No, it's okay. It's just something else. It's the humidifier. Oh, my connection is unstable. That figures. Um, so we had access to some information about the Nag Hammadi library, the primarily Gnostic writings found in Egypt. We had some books about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but many of those ancient manuscripts either had not been translated yet or had been published only in academic journals that we really didn't have access to. For example, I was studying pre-medicine. I wanted to be a veterinarian. Well, there's one journal for kidney disease, another journal for heart disease, another journal for general medical stuff, another journal for liver disease, another journal for neurological uh, problems. Each one of those journals costing a bloody fortune to subscribe. Now, the university libraries would have some of those. They'd generally be a few months old, not current. And quite often, you had to read them on something called microfiche. Computers existed, but nobody had one. And microfiche was basically little photographs that you put in this machine that looks like a television, and it enlarges them so you can read them. And then you move between pages with this mechanical lever. And not everybody could use the university library. You really needed to be a student. Anybody could go into the university library and read stuff that was there. You couldn't check out a book and take it home. Sorry. Here goes the coughing fit. Anyway, so Phil didn't really understand Gnosticism, and I didn't either at that time. And you must not confuse Phil's idea of Gnosticism with the modern Gnostics you'll find all over YouTube and other. Hi, Sleepy Dave. Can't type in the box until I click on the box. There, here we go. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. This is my usual COPD. They say it's, oh, hi, Tim. Let's see. They say that this is because I smoke cigarettes, but I smoked cigarettes for decades and didn't get this lung problem till I worked on a military base near the runway where it smelled of jet fuel 24/7. And my lungs actually improved when I quit working there. But right now, the major thing is pollen from all our trees. I'm trying to convince the neighbors to get rid of his walnut trees. They're the worst. But, you know, I'm not going to push it too far. He likes his trees. I'm in a forest, you know. Oak, cedar, pine, and of course we have fruit trees. I have an ancient apple tree. Anyway, The Gnostics you'll find on YouTube and all over the place now are not the same as the Gnostics Phil was referring to. He was referring to the Gnostics of the early centuries, probably about 300 BC to 300 AD. Sorry. That might do it. Well, Phil believed in the Trinity. Gnostics do not. And Phil's theology was more dualist, like Zoroastrianism. Oh gosh. Okay. I don't want to necessarily stop coughing. It gets the crud out of my windpipe. I can tell it's not coming from my lungs, it's bronchitis. But let's do this. Anyway, Phil was a dualist in the sense that he believed there was a battle like Zoroaster's Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, the good god of light, the bad god of darkness. And Phil's theology was more Zoroastrian than Gnostic. He also looked into Manichaeism. Mani, M-A-N-I, was an early Christian heretic, a dualist, two gods, one good, one bad. And then there's Marcion, M-A-R-C-I-O-N, who, well, the Marcion heresy was kind of Gnostic, but also drew from Buddhism and Zoroastrianism. Also a Christian heretic, like Mani. Zoroaster, being a Persian and probably living around 700 BC, didn't know about Christianity. There was no such thing in his time. But this dualism, this battle between a good God and an evil God, was Phil's way of dealing with suffering in this world. So I guess I'm not the only one who's up in the middle of the night. That's cool. I got listeners. Anyway, Phil explained that the evil God believed he could win, but he couldn't because the good God was more powerful. And Phil was striving to learn why the good God, being more powerful, allowed the evil God to keep on causing all this suffering and death. And of course, Phil often referred to the writings of Paul in the New Testament. And he'd cherry pick verses without going through the whole context. But those verses were very important, like, death, where is thy sting? Grave, where is thy victory? And we see now as through a glass darkly, a glass being a mirror, but then face to face. So when we die and go to heaven, we can see God's face without dying, whereas here in our earthly bodies, if we really saw God face to face, it would kill us. Well, the thing is, and Phil discussed this in his descriptions of the palm tree garden, Yeah, we can go to heaven when we die, but that's not our ultimate destination. Our ultimate destination is the garden, the earth, a new earth, the one we got kicked out of because the Nachash, the serpent, tempted us and we rebelled. Yeah, I'm not really up late, Sleepy Dave. I'm up early. I took a nap in the afternoon and didn't wake up till after 1 in the morning. And I thought this is the perfect opportunity to go on YouTube because they won't have so much going on that they won't let me live stream. See, I'm low on their list of priorities. Someone with more followers or a monetized channel, uh, or even a paid membership will take priority when they can't accommodate everyone. So I thought, well, hey, as long as I'm up in the middle of the night, let's see if YouTube will let me on. And they did. So, the X in exegesis. Now, Phil mistakenly believed that the cross on which Jesus was crucified was shaped like the letter X. It really couldn't be, but that's what he believed. Now, we didn't have the X Files that premiered in 1993, I think, about 10 years or more after Phil died. But of course, we were aware, having been forced to study algebra, that X, the letter X, stands for the unknown. And what Phil was doing wasn't really exegesis, but I'm glad he called it that because it fits with the X, the great unknown. What he was doing is more properly eisegesis, in the sense that rather than interpreting scriptures and other writings in the context of the people who wrote them and the people they wrote them for, in other words, their time and place, Phil was interpreting scripture in terms of our life in the 20th century. So when he saw, for example, the Roman Empire overlaid like a transparency on top of Fullerton in 1974, Phil's context was Fullerton in 1974, not Rome in the first century. And Fullerton had, what in the world? I thought I saw something move behind me. It wasn't the cat. Well, anyway, we had pine trees and palm trees pretty much next to each other, and cedars. Uh, right next to the paved city streets and sidewalks. The local post office was Spanish mission style, and it does look, or did look, kind of Roman. The round arches of Roman architecture, and it kind of looked like adobe, but it was really stucco. And in front of the post office were pine trees and palm trees. So, in a sense, we could see a Roman overlay quite literally as solid objects. But he'd also see iron prison bars over the windows of apartment buildings. And in a sense, that's a metaphor. We really are slaves to the clock, to the dollar, and to the government. We just think we're free. Um, the modern factory age led to the development of the time clock. People used to work till the job was done, or they had to get some sleep or stop to take a meal. But with factories that employed people without regard to their humanity or even the fact that they were living beings, the factories used the time clock. You worked for 8 hours with a break for lunch, and in many factories, you worked for 12 hours. And it, everything, your work, your lunch was by the clock. So you didn't have lunch when you were hungry. You had lunch when the clock said you were allowed to have your lunch. And you didn't start work when you were ready. You started work when the clock said to. Now, on the farms, people worked when the sun rose and stopped working when the sun set. In the factories, it didn't matter what the sun was doing. All that mattered was what the clock said. Yes, Tim, slaves to entropy. Um, and the clock is winding down. But modern astrophysics is finding weird things going on. According to the law of entropy, the expansion of our universe should be slowing down. If it began with a big bang of expansion, as the universe loses energy to the force of entropy, that expansion should slow down. And it has been slowing down, but not anymore. It seems to be speeding up. Well, it can't do that without the addition of energy. Now, technically, energy is never destroyed, it's always there. What entropy really tells us is that it becomes less and less useful. So, for example, when we try to reverse entropy by burning a fuel to create kinetic energy, the energy of motion, we never get anywhere near to 100% of the energy from heat. In fact, we're lucky if we can get 10% of the energy. The rest is lost to things like friction and entropy. The heat primarily goes off into the air or the water or the metal housing. You will notice that when engines are running, they get hot. You don't want to touch a car engine when it's been running, it's hot because most of the energy is going off as heat, which dissipates, and heat is the least useful form of energy. Well, anyway, they're discovering that the expansion of the universe is increasing, which is why they theorize that there's dark energy, which is a fancy way of avoiding the idea that some force outside our universe is adding energy. Kind of like Phil's novel Ubik, a spray can that when someone sprays the cold world with Ubik, it gets warmer. Well, they just don't want the G word coming into things. They don't want to talk about God, whether they believe in God or not. They're doing science. And I have a lot of problem with creation science. It um, commits the same sin as atheist science. Cherry picking the facts to support the theory instead of observing the universe and then developing the theory from their observations. I happen to be a Christian, a Baptist, I think. I'm not really sure I understand Baptist theology, but I do agree that you should be baptized only once and only when you're old enough to understand what it means. Not necessarily old enough, but um, intellectually mature enough. So you can still be a child, but not an infant. Now, if I were to become a Catholic, for example, or an Episcopalian, I'd have to get baptized again into their faith because the Protestant evangelical baptism doesn't count. And then the Messianic churches, the believing Jews who believe that Jesus is Messiah, they have the word has slipped my mind. It's a ritual bath. All the time, at least once a year, to cleanse themselves of sin. Mikvah, thank you, Tim. I just couldn't come up with the word. Anyway, for example, our local church does it once a year as a group in a local lake. The mikveh has to be from a natural water source. You can't just fill your bathtub. You have to use water from a spring or a lake or a river. So, of course, John the Baptist was dunking people in the Jordan River. There, my foot was falling asleep. Had to move. Let's move again. All right. I'm on great Granny's rocking chair. See? And I have pillows on top of the seat cushion because the seat cushion isn't very soft. So anyway, I think once is enough. It was full immersion in a backyard swimming pool at a Southern Baptist church. I had arranged by phone to get baptized. And I walked into the church thinking, when I saw all the people, I went, oh my God. You see, I thought I wasn't prejudiced, but when I saw that the entire congregation was Black people, I was kind of worried, but I got baptized and attended church a few times. I just got tired of Phil wouldn't go. He was Episcopalian. He didn't go to the Episcopal church either, except to talk to the priest and have conferences with him, talking about his, well, I guess confessing his sins and talking about his problems in life and discussing theology. But it was incredible. And the singing, the whole congregation would sing along with the choir. And if I wasn't loud enough, they'd kind of nudge me and say, louder, louder. And so that's when, even though I'd been in school choirs and church choirs, um, that experience really freed me to really sing. And it didn't matter if you were out of tune or off key, you were praising God and you needed to do loud singing. And the more I did it, the better I got. Our local Baptist church doesn't have the old hymns. They've even managed to make Amazing Grace hard to sing. Well, anyway, so here's Phil, an Episcopalian, and I get baptized as a Southern Baptist. Now I'm just a Baptist, not Southern, because there are some problems with the Southern Baptist uh, doctrine that I wasn't aware of. And I'm only vaguely aware of them now, but at least they are not the ones who handle snakes and drink poison, which is based on the end of the Gospel of Luke, which almost certainly was added later by Erasmus. He was compiling a Greek New Testament from various manuscripts and fragments, and the people who were paying him wanted that added in. Now, of course, snakes make us think of the serpent in the garden, but yeah, it could have been a snake. But the Hebrew Nachash can also mean the shining one, which of course would be Lucifer in Isaiah's prophecy. Hillel ben Shachar. Lucifer is the Latin word derived from the Greek translation of Hillel ben Shachar, son of the dawn. Might even mean the planet Venus or the planet Mars. Both of those planets often appear as what we call the morning star. It's more often Venus. But in John's Revelation, Jesus says, I am the bright and morning star. Our scriptures, let alone theology, the scriptures themselves are quite confusing to us because we are not Second Temple Jews or early Christians. We don't have the background, the cultural and literary background to understand what they believed in when they wrote their scriptures. And I've been kind of skirting around the edges of one rabbit hole, and that would be Genesis chapter 6, the first 4 verses. The sons of God married the daughters of men and had children. And then, I think it's verse 4, there were Nephilim in the earth in those days. Now, Nephilim almost certainly means giants and not fallen ones, although it can have the connotation that the giants are spiritually fallen. They didn't come from outer space on a spaceship. However, based on the book of Enoch, first Enoch, people assume that the Nephilim are the offspring, the gigantic offspring of the sons of God. Yeah, Chuck Missler is great. I've listened to Chuck Missler and Michael Heiser and some others whose names I can't come up with on Genesis 6 and on the book of Enoch. But I'm wondering, just from the text in Genesis chapter 6, those first 4 verses, I'm wondering if the Nephilim are a separate group, not the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of women, but another second group. That we have the gigantic offspring of the sons of God and the giants who are human, or something else. Because the problem is, if the flood wiped out all the people except Noah and his sons and their wives, where'd the new Nephilim come from after the flood? Well, maybe they're simply a mutation of humans. We've had, in relatively modern times, people over 8 feet tall. I think the record was a man who was 8 feet and 11 inches. We think nothing of watching a baseball game where many of them are over 7 feet tall, especially the center has to be really tall. And yeah, there can be giants. Now, you might think 7 feet isn't that far out of the range of humans, but even now, the average man is only about 5'6", maybe 5'8". So 7 feet is pretty darn tall. I went to high school with a young man who was 7 feet tall, and he had to bend over to go through a doorway because the doorways were designed for people 6 feet and under. And he was just a normal human who happened to be very tall. Now, in the Bible, it talks about people who, like Goliath, who were probably between 12 and 16 feet tall. That's pretty darn big. They probably couldn't get in through the doorway of a modern house, not only being tall, but also wide. There's a reason why we have folk tales about giants. People weren't just imagining things. Legends and myths are basically true. The Greek pantheon with Zeus and Apollo and Aphrodite and all of those, they aren't lies, they aren't fiction. Now, things have been exaggerated, embellished, and just plain made up. But those gods did exist. They just weren't God. And by the way, Philip K. Dick used to exaggerate, embellish, and make stuff up. But he wrote his books based on real experiences that he really had in real life. And of course, well, hi, IB Collectibles. I think that must be Zach. I'm not sure. Yes, my sleep schedule is totally messed up. I lay down for a nap because I had a sinus headache, and the next thing I knew, it was the middle of the night. But guess what? YouTube let me do a live video, so it's cool. They get too busy during the day and they don't have any bandwidth left for poor little me. So I'm trying to get more subscribers to raise my ranking so I'm a little higher up in the list of people who can have the precious bandwidth when they're really busy. Anyway, this started out as a discussion of Gnosticism, especially in the exegesis. Well, Phil didn't understand Gnosticism, and his personal theology was more like Zoroastrianism. He did believe in the Christian Trinity, but he also believed that there was a battle between good and evil, which of course is scriptural. It's a Judeo-Christian idea, but Zoroaster had the evil god being much more powerful than the devil of Christianity, or the serpent in Judaism. Well, I used to be a night owl, but when I retired, so I didn't have to work nights, I worked nights. My sleep cycle kind of resolved to getting up with the sun. Okay. I'm glad to see all of you here. It's awesome. Well, anyway, Zoroaster had Ahura Mazda, or sometimes just Mazda, the god of light. Always makes me think of that Japanese car. Their early models had a rotary engine that was always breaking down. And then, of course, the god of darkness, Ahriman, in a constant battle of good versus evil, light versus darkness. Okay. And that was Phil's idea, which you can see in many of his novels. That we humans are caught as pawns in that battle of light versus darkness, and we must choose a side. If you go to the darkness, you're in deep trouble. If you go to the light, you might still be in deep trouble. I think of Father Malachi Martin, who told Art Bell, when you die, don't go to the light, it's a trick. Now, in Hinduism, you're supposed to avoid the smoky red light and go to the bright white light. But Father Martin said, don't go to the light. YouTube wants me to learn more about guidelines. Remember to guard your privacy and abide by our community guidelines. Come naturally, not a conscious decision. Oh, your choice of the light. Well, in Christianity, when you die, you're supposed to ask Jesus to guide you, ask Christ to guide you. And his name wasn't Jesus, it was Yeshua, which is, of course, what we call Joshua. So as Joshua led the Israelites into the Holy Land, Yeshua, Jesus, leads us into heaven. But once again, that's not our ultimate destination. We might go to what we call hell, but not the place of punishment, just the place where dead people are. Sheol. Or we might go to heaven, but neither one is our ultimate destination. Our ultimate destination is a new earth, where heaven and earth are together and there's no more suffering and no more death. Now you might ask, how could we fit all the people who have ever lived on a new earth? Well, even with over 7 billion people in the world today, we could all fit comfortably in the state of Texas. And if the new earth is like the Garden of Eden everywhere instead of deserts and tundras and, all that stuff, well, even Texas would be a nice place to live. Is YouTube listening? I don't know, Tim. They just have these algorithms. If they're too busy and they're running out of bandwidth to to stream these videos, people who don't have a lot of followers and are not monetized and so forth are last in line for the bandwidth they have. I love the chat. That's why I don't just record something and put it up. I'm here for the chat. As Robert Phoenix says, you're in Chatlandia. And I love his cat. But I don't always wake up early enough to catch his show live. Anyway, I was kind of worried coming on in the middle of the night that I wouldn't have live chat. Artificial intelligence is maybe lurking everywhere, yes. That's kind of like the androids in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Phil conceived of them as people grown in a laboratory, but people nevertheless, totally organic. And of course, Blade Runner calls them replicants and also has them grown in a lab, but they have mechanical parts. Their bones are metal and they have serial numbers stamped on them. That was not Phil's idea, and it doesn't make sense in Blade Runner, especially the second film, Blade Runner 2049. Why would they need the Voight-Kampff test to determine whether they're androids when they could just read the tattoo on their eye or take an x-ray of their leg and read the serial number on their leg bone? And Ridley Scott wants Rick Deckard to be an android, a replicant, like his Officer K in the second film. Phil's question was not whether Deckard was human, but rather whether Rachel was a human who lacked empathy. And if you read his novel carefully, oh man, my connection is unstable. My connection is unstable. It is kind of going in and out a little. Anyway, if you read Phil's novel carefully, you find that these androids are friends with each other. They have conversations that are not just down to business and each one for himself. They have empathy. Oh, I'm glad you read it, IB. um, you don't have that nuance in especially the second Blade Runner. Well, maybe you do. You have the replicants giving birth and stuff like that. And they have a movement for liberation. But in the novel, the real question is whether Deckard has lost all empathy because of his job killing androids, not whether he's human. And yeah, I just, the second film of Blade Runner, they don't explain why all of a sudden there's replicants all over the earth, because there's a law, a universal law, that they are not allowed on the earth. And they never explain how come that law, either it's being disobeyed or they did away with that law. Oh, Rachel lives beyond the death date. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of problems, especially in the second Blade Runner film. The, the I found myself constantly shouting, continuity. There's things that just don't make sense. And the biggest one, of course, is when Love goes to the police station to use their computer to find Officer K. They've already established that the police computer cannot find him, but Love can find Officer K through his virtual girlfriend. So she didn't need to go to the police station and commit a grisly murder, although it is a shocking scene. Uh, I was just shouting, continuity. Where's the continuity? Did they even hire someone to oversee continuity? They're supposed to. Yeah. Well, Rachel in the first Blade Runner supposedly hooks up with Rick Deckard and escapes and isn't killed, depending upon which version of the first Blade Runner, the 1982 film. There's several versions out there, but she survives in all of them. Well, maybe Rachel is human. I like to think that she is. She's a human who lacks empathy, and Rick Deckard is a human who loses all empathy because his job is killing people. And just because they're androids doesn't mean they aren't people. It's a metaphor for slavery. In the early days of black slavery, many churches justified it by saying that the black Africans were not human; they were a different species. I hope we've outgrown that horrible concept. You see, when the colonists discovered Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Black Africans, they didn't know what to do with that because, according to the Catholic Church, they had a big problem. Were these people, did they have souls? Could they be saved? Well, they tried to convert them to Christianity. Um, but they considered them different species from the Europeans and the Chinese. They had come to accept that the people of Asia were humans. Sorry, I'm not ill, I just cough a lot, especially when I've been sleeping. I can't lie flat, I sleep reclined in a recliner chair. But even so, while I'm sleeping, the congestion doesn't get expelled, coughed up, or breathed out. Old age isn't all it's cracked up to be. Anyway, yeah, people are people. I mean, lions and tigers are different species, but they're cats. All cats are cats. And just because we choose to divide them based on their appearance more than anything else, doesn't mean that they aren't cats. And there's all kinds of people, different um, physical appearance and so forth will result from populations being isolated. And my, not quite a theory, but an idea about Neanderthal is that they were a tribe that was isolated from other people due to climate and geography, and they became inbred and different from people that they had no contact with. Um, and the fact that we can get DNA from Neanderthal bones and teeth suggests that there's something terribly wrong with our dating system. They've even managed to extract DNA and proteins, now not a whole genome, but bits and pieces from dinosaur bones. If dinosaurs lived 2 or 300 million years ago, there shouldn't be any DNA left. There shouldn't be any soft tissues, certainly not protein. And yet there it is. Now, I'm not saying that the Earth is 6,000 years old. That's ridiculous. Bishop Ussher did the best he could to come up with that chronology, but he was wrong. However, the Earth has to be young because it's geologically active. Earthquakes, continental drift, volcanoes. Islands forming, islands sinking, coastlines forming, coastlines sinking, or being flooded anyway. Yeah, well, maybe humans like us have been around for 250,000 years, but I just can't see the Earth being 4 billion years old and being this geologically active. There's something wrong with our dating system. Geologists and archaeologists see these layers of different kinds of dirt and rocks when they dig down or when they look at the face of a cliff, and they assume that it took so many thousands of years and millions of years for these different layers to form. But what if they formed in a huge flood in a relatively short period of time, which probably is the case? Yeah, we could be millions of years old, Ivy. I just really think our dating system needs serious revision. But of course, it's more than 6,000 years. That just doesn't work. Yes, God could have made the whole universe in the blink of an eye. But we don't know when he did that. We really don't know. The Bible doesn't say. Now, the Hindu scriptures talk about millions of years of people on the earth. Um, if we're translating them correctly and if they were correct, but you know, I wonder if they were human people. I mean, the standard churchy answer to extraterrestrials is they don't exist because they aren't in the Bible. And my answer to them is, well, then what are angels? The Nakash lived in the garden. The serpent lived in the garden. The sons of God came down to the earth and lived here. It's right there in the Bible. They married human women and made babies. They taught humans the art of war and the art of enchantment, of basically pharmakia in the Greek, which is witchcraft. They taught that we already had wars, we already had honey traps, but they taught us to make war better and to kill more. They taught us to use makeup and perfume and even herbs in food and drink to to for women to basically get a man, even if he was already married to someone else, or she was, or both. So it's right there in the Bible. Non-human people living on the earth, and in especially Second Temple, but in Jewish tradition, there was a time when well, we call them angels, but really there's more to it than that. There was a time when the earth was inhabited by people who were not human, and they rebelled against God. And what do you know? When God sent them away, and well, they could still visit, like the serpent living in the garden, but he peopled the earth with Adam and Eve. we also rebelled. Oh, well, now in terms of, I don't know whether they're real memories or visions. I really can't be certain, but experiences that I've had, what we call ET, to my mind, is human beings who left this planet and lived somewhere else and they're coming back. Now, of course, there are other extraterrestrial beings, but at least some of them are humans, people. Antarctica. Well, the evidence shows that Antarctica was once tropical. There was tropical vegetation there. And even now, under the ice, there are what they call warm water lakes. Now, we would consider that water cold, but they're warm enough to contain living organisms. Lakes that don't freeze. And even in just ordinary lakes and ponds that we see around us that freeze, there are animals and plants that survive through being frozen. Frogs come to mind. Algae comes to mind. When it thaws out, the living things thaw out and grow and eat and reproduce and so forth. Now, the standard answer to why Antarctica once had a tropical rainforest is that the Earth slipped on its axis and Antarctica used to be where Australia is now. There are problems with that. What if, and we know this is considered a scientific fact, at one time the entire Earth was warmer, before the Ice Age, in the time of the amphibians, which is before dinosaurs. Although I have a few nits to pick with that. The whole Earth was like a gigantic tropical rainforest, or at least temperate. There weren't any ice caps before the Ice Age, which brings up the question, what caused the Ice Age? Well, either way, Antarctica was very tropical at one time. There's remains of trees and ferns and mosses and all kinds of stuff under the ice in Antarctica. And apparently, there are small parts of Antarctica that are not frozen year round. Makes you wonder why they don't let everybody go there. I once knew a woman who, she was just a secretary, but she got a gig in Antarctica. And it paid very well. But of course, she had to stay there for a year. Or was it 6 months? Whatever it was. Um, Before getting the job, she had to undergo an FBI background check. And she had to swear on a stack of Bibles that she would not talk about anything she saw, heard, or learned in Antarctica. Totally secret. And she was just a secretary. Photos of pyramids. I've seen photos of mountains on Antarctica that appear to be pyramids. I'm kind of agnostic on that point. We need It's definitely a reason why we need to do more exploration there. That's what really ticks me off. For example, Bigfoot. Oh, it couldn't possibly exist, so there's no point looking into it. Well, excuse me, but people have seen something, looks to be a North American ape or else a very hairy human. The fact that we can't prove that Bigfoot exists is not a reason to avoid investigating it. And yet, people who do investigate it find themselves attacked and shut down, shut out of the peer reviewed literature that scientists like to stake their reputations on. Oh, this is ridiculous. There couldn't be a Bigfoot, so we won't publish any papers about Bigfoot unless they conclude that it doesn't exist. They worship in the hallowed halls of science, and they do all the things that they accuse the Christian churches of doing. Oh, the sun is coming up in New York. Yeah, it's about 6:30 there. It's 3:30 here. Anyway, do you know that it wasn't the Pope who concluded that the earth was flat? It was the ancient Greeks. I've forgotten which one was who, but some of the ancient Greek philosophers in the 300 years BC, more or less, determined that the Earth was a globe, a sphere, and they even estimated its size and came very close to our modern measurements. But one of them, one or more of them, and I forget which one, concluded that the Earth was flat, and he was the expert, so that was that. And when Galileo recanted and said, okay, the Earth is flat, it wasn't, well, it was partly because he was threatened by the Inquisition, but it was also because he couldn't prove that the Earth was round. He believed it was round, but he couldn't prove it. The ancient Greeks concluded that the Earth was round because they measured it. When they were surveying the land to build a new city, they noticed that plane geometry just didn't work. Plane meaning flat, measuring a flat surface. And when they measured the distance from, for example, Athens to Egypt to Alexandria, it didn't conform to a flat surface. It really looked like the Earth was round. Now, on a small scale, like say the lot my house is on, it seems pretty flat. But if you fly from Los Angeles to New York, you just might notice that the horizon is kind of round. And when you watch ships go out to sea, the guy on the ship sees the shore sinking. The guy on the shore sees the ship sinking. So the one thing I am certain of is that the earth is not flat. But the ancient Israelites and the people around them thought the earth was flat and it had a dome over the sky, kept the air in for one thing, and all the stars and planets and the sun were attached to this dome. And underneath the earth, of course, was what we call hell, Sheol, the land of the dead. Well, you buried the dead. Of course, they were under the earth. And it was not necessarily a place of punishment. Our idea of hell comes primarily from Dante and his Inferno in the Divine Comedy. Oh, the comedy is not funny. What comedy used to mean was that it had a happy ending. And I guess going to heaven is a happy ending. Anyway, but Dante got his ideas from Greek myth. Heroes like Achilles would go to Hades, but they weren't punished. They were actually almost worshipped. But it was a boring place of darkness and shadows, and it just wasn't any fun. But some people were punished. Like Tantalus. He was originally a king in Anatolia, modern Turkey. And he tempted the gods. The gods used to come down and eat at his table, and he thought, well, I wonder if I can trick the gods. So he killed his son Pelops and had him cooked for dinner. And the gods sat down at the table, and they knew instantly that this was human flesh, so they didn't eat him. They put him back together and brought him back to life. But one foolish nymph had actually eaten his shoulder. So the god Hephaestus, Roman Vulcan, made a silver shoulder for Pelops. Well, you can imagine Pelops didn't have much use for his father. So he left home and founded a civilization in the Peloponnesian Peninsula, southern Greece. And Tantalus, of course, died and went to a real hell, where he was standing in a pool of water and he was thirsty, but when he bent down to drink, the water flowed away. And above him was a bunch of grapes. In different versions, it's different kinds of food, but there's food above his head. And when he's hungry and he reaches up to eat, the bunch of grapes rises higher so he can't reach it. And so Tantalus is tantalized. So when we really want something, it's tantalizing. The connotation is that you should not go after something that's tantalizing, but when I see tantalizing food, I go after it. Cheesecake, chicken livers, grapes, all kinds of food. Sushi. Love sushi. I get the kind that's cooked. I have had sashimi, the raw stuff, but you really are taking a chance even with the best of sushi chefs. And then there's that South American thing that we do a lot up here now. I'm trying to remember what it's called, where they take, for example, a fillet of tuna and put it in lemon juice. It isn't cooked, but technically it isn't raw. It isn't heated, but the lemon juice kind of cooks it. Yeah, I can't stand wasabi. Ceviche, thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, that I would try if I could find someone who makes it. I don't trust myself to get the right fish. You know, the stuff in the grocery store might not be the kind you want to do that with. I'd want a chef who knows what he's doing. Yeah, wasabi kills the parasites, but I had a horseradish accident once. I was eating a baked potato with prime rib and I mistook the horseradish for the sour cream and put it all over the baked potato. I can handle wasabi in small amounts. It's basically horseradish with those um, peas. Uh, anyway, my water's empty. I'm going to go refill it real quick. Okay. Water. I've found that many of the problems I have are from uh, dehydration. So I make sure I get sufficient salt and a little sugar along with water. Oh, you thought Vegemite was chocolate, you poor thing. Ugh. Oh dear. I have cheesecake and a blob of my homemade blackberry jam from blackberries that I picked last summer. And I had such a bumper crop that I froze a bunch of them. Well, I needed room in the freezer, so I made more jam. The cheesecake, of course, is store bought. I'm not all. I'm not much of a cook. Phil said I was the worst cook he ever met, but then he bought me The Joy of Cooking. It's sort of the Bible of home cooking. It it helped, but I had never had ingredients other than a can of tuna or a pound of hamburger. How long have I been in this house? Well, I bought it in '04. It was a rental before I lost the house I was living in. And I moved in around '07. So that's 13 years. I'm working on the kitchen. I'm waiting for the isolation, the sheltering in place to end so someone can rip out the old cupboards and sink. They're rotten. I have new floor tiles, a new base cabinet and sink. Not the whole wall to wall cabinets, they're too expensive. But I have the cabinet and sink, which is the most important part. And I can fill it in with the various small cupboard thingies that I'm already using. They're sort of portable. I will have to replace the stove. I can light the burners with a match, but the oven won't work at all because the electronic pilots don't work and you can't light the oven with a match. It just won't let the gas come through the line unless the electric pilot is working. I'm going to have to take a quick break to recycle some coffee, but I'll be right back. So hang in there. I'm not ending this yet. Okay. Ah, I'm back, I think. Here we go. Ceviche. I'm going to have to try that someday. Gabriel's going on his evening walk. Well, thank you for listening, Gabriel. Evening walk. Let's see, Thailand must be 12 or 14 hours tomorrow. So, yeah, it would be evening there. That international dateline confuses me. Anyway, I still have 4 listeners. That's cool. Gerard Perry. Oh, hi there. Tora has come to visit. She's such a good kitty. Yes. Oh, our happy kitty. Yeah. Don't chew on the mommy. Don't chew on the mommy. Ice on the roof. Well, we have from time to time had snow in May. I'm on a mountain, but it's supposed to end in mid-March. In fact, we've had summer snow, even June and July. I don't think it's ever snowed in August. But lately it's been rather warm as 80 degrees up here, and of course 90 to 100 down in the valley. Uh, yeah, Tor's a good kitty. Don't chew on the mommy. Yeah, she likes to hug my arm to hold it still so she can chew on it. That isn't too bad when I'm wearing a sweater, but it's a bad habit, isn't it? Good girl. Oh, anyway, let's see, where was I? So Dante has Tantalus in hell in the Inferno in the Divine Comedy, and he has some of his political enemies in there too. And then there's Sisyphus, who's forced to push a boulder up to the top of a hill, and every time he gets there, the boulder rolls back down, so he has to push it up again. And I've forgotten the background story for Sisyphus, but he's in the Inferno, and he comes from Greek myth, just like Tantalus. Now, if you're a fan of Dune, you know that the hero is one of the Atreides from the House of Atreus. Well, there's cat hair in my eyelashes. Gee, I wonder where that came from. Huh, Tora? Well, at least she's purring now. Yes. The Atreides were this cursed family in ancient Greece. Now, it's a myth, but myth doesn't mean fiction. It just means there's gods involved in the story. Well, the Atreides included the major players in the Trojan War. Descendants of Atreus, like, Agamemnon and what's his name? Helen of Troy's husband, the king of Sparta. Well, anyway, the two kings were twin brothers, and they married a pair of twin sisters. Agamemnon ended up with his wife killing him so she and her lover could rule the kingdom. And, what's his name? The king of Sparta. Yeah, he didn't die, but he ended up stuck with Helen, who had left him for the Persian luxury of Troy on the coast of Anatolia, modern Turkey. Yeah, they weren't technically Persians, but they enjoyed trade with Persia for silk and spices and other luxuries. Well, who wouldn't leave Sparta, which was so Spartan, for a luxurious life with good food and soft cushions and like that? In Sparta, even the king and queen slept on wooden boards with just a rough blanket, probably scratchy and itchy too. Their clothing was rough, kind of like wearing a potato sack. They were a warrior culture. After a certain age, children were expected to steal food. Nobody fed them. And if they got caught, they were punished not for stealing food, but for getting caught. Yes, dear. All right, no chew on the mommy. Hop down. That's better. One nice thing about the mountains is that fleas do not survive. Now, tourists often bring up fleas on their pets over the summer, but the fleas don't survive the winter. Fleas are nasty, blood-sucking creatures. Oh, I think the food dish is empty. The cat dish. Anyway, where were we? Gnosticism and Philip K. Dick. Well, he didn't really understand Gnostic, and even though his theology contained some Gnostic ideas, uh, he didn't really understand Gnosticism. He thought that this saving knowledge would bring paradise down to earth. Well, the Gnostics believed that the few elite who possessed the knowledge could go to heaven and be with the gods when they died. It's rather different. But Phil did read at least about Plotinus, one of the Neoplatonists of, I think around 2 to 300 AD. And Plotinus got his ideas in great part from Plato. When we think about going to heaven when you die, we're probably thinking more along the lines of what Plato said than what the Bible says. You get the idea of dead people being in the bosom of Abraham. Jesus talks about that. And we do get the idea of going up to heaven for the judgment. But it's not our destination. Elaine Pagels. Tim, who I don't know who that is. I'm going to have to look her up. I am aware of some Gnostics, and I always forget their names. But I've been on their YouTube shows. Well, they're not necessarily YouTube, but that's where they end up. And we have a cordial relationship, but we disagree. She wrote about the Gnostic Gospels. Oh, yeah. The Gnostic Gospels aren't really Gospels. They're primarily collections of things that Jesus said, or little vignettes, little stories about Jesus talking to his disciples. For example, I don't remember which one, but in one of them, the disciples object to his hanging out with Mary Magdalene because she's a woman. And Jesus replies that I will make her male. You see, to the Gnostics, women don't have the spark of the divine. They can't go to heaven. And I believe it's, might be Gospel of Thomas. No, it's Philip. One of them, anyway. People will tell you that Jesus kissed Mary Magdalene on her mouth. Well, actually, that word is missing from the manuscript. There's a hole in the papyrus or parchment or whatever it is, and it just says Jesus kissed her on the, and then it's blank. And the word mouth would fit there, but it could say cheek or forehead or some other things. And it doesn't mean he was married to her. In fact, when the disciples object to him liking, you like Mary more than us. Why do you like her more? Well, if he was married to her, it would be obvious, wouldn't it? A guy really has to prefer his wife to his friends if he wants a happy marriage. Adam, Eve, and the Serpent by Elaine Pagels. It might be Pagels, or I don't know. Adam, Eve, and the Serpent. Interesting. By the way, the New Testament blames Adam for the fall, not Eve. Eve was deceived by the serpent, but Adam knew what he was doing. And in Milton's Paradise Lost, we get the idea that Adam loved Eve so much that he would rather be kicked out of the Garden of Eden than live without her. And that's why he ate the forbidden fruit. So he wouldn't be separated from Eve when she got kicked out. Oh, we've been going for nearly 2 hours. Wow. Well, I'll have to look up that book, Tim. I've been delving into the few academic papers that I have access to. I don't have a budget to subscribe to journals, and I'm no longer affiliated with the university, so I can't get them for free. But there is a website where people offer their papers for free, and you can buy a premium membership to get some bells and whistles, but I really can't afford to spend extra money. I'm on what they call a fixed income. I'm 65, so I have Social Security. And my book sales really plummeted during the shutdown for that virus. I was making, about $35 a month. Now I'm making almost $10 a month. So basically, I'm on Social Security. It sucks, but oh well. It's something. I'm hoping my next book will break out and actually sell very well. It's rather academic, but because I don't have software with bells and whistles, I can't really put in footnotes and have them come out right in a published book. So I'm putting all the notes within the text. I kind of prefer that anyway when I'm reading. If you don't really care, you can skip over the citation that says who wrote it and where it came, the title of the book or paper. And if you want to know, you don't have to look at the tiny print at the bottom of the page or flip to the end of the chapter or the end of the book and try to, find the right one. It's right there in front of you. It's killing me. And I'm at this point trying to show how Phil's earlier novels present the same ideas as he does in Valis. That he didn't just suddenly have a vision in 1974 and become a Zoroastrian or a Gnostic or whatever. That he developed these ideas over decades. In Ubik, for example, entropy is destroying their world, not just the people, but the world in which they live. But Ubik, this force from outside, gives them energy fighting against entropy. In the same way as our universe might be receiving energy from outside. And of course, the scientists, in order to avoid the G word, God, talk about dark energy and dark matter. We know it has to be there even though we can't see it. Well, I know God has to be there even though I can't see him. Same argument. One scientific, the other religious, but it's the same idea. And I've studied science. I did 2 years of pre-med before I realized that there was no way that I could do a good job as a single parent and do all the studies and internships required to become a veterinarian or even a nurse. I just couldn't do it. So I ended up teaching English, which isn't bad. Yeah, Ubik had Half-Life, which is sort of a reference to the decay of radioactive elements. Well, anyway, um, I wish I could go back to school, but it's kind of late in life. I got my master's degree and I just never went for the doctorate because of the cost of going to the university. I was already burdened with student loans. I've paid them off now, but I couldn't take on another student loan. I have no budget for it. But I'd love to get a PhD in something. Even in high school, I was studying science. I did not read much fiction and certainly not science fiction. However, I actually had read a little bit, even things that were not assigned in school. At one point, in what you call middle school, we called it junior high, I read every book that the school library had if it involved horses. Fiction, nonfiction, didn't matter. When I ran out of those, I was in that school for 2 years. Then I read Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. And then I read Robert Heinlein's juvenile novel, The Rolling Stones. And someone had ripped out the last page. I was so upset. And it was decades later when I finally came across a copy that had the last page. And really didn't make much difference. It's about a family on board a ship and they're mining asteroids. That's about all I remember. But then one time I was on a sort of gathering, kind of like a class reunion in the mountains in a cabin. And I hadn't brought any books with me, and the only book there was an ace double. Now, the one side was The Mind Monsters. I wasn't terribly impressed with that one. But the other side was The Unteleported Man. Now, I didn't remember authors' names at the time, but it turned out it was an early novel by Philip K. Dick. But when I met him, I didn't remember that. I'd never heard of him. And then one time when I was in summer school and just on the equivalent of study hall, I read this book. I think it was called Science Fiction Terror Tales, a bunch of short stories. And one of them was Roog. So when I learned that Phil wrote Roog, that was one of the things that convinced me that he was the man I wanted to be with. Roog tells the story of a dog who sees the garbage collectors as aliens who are stealing treasures from his humans. Oh, I love Roog. I don't know why it would be in science fiction terror tales, though. Oh well, I think that's the book it was in. So I had read that one story and that one novel, but I still have trouble remembering authors' names. I couldn't get through Heinlein's Time Enough for Love. Couldn't get through much of Heinlein, but I had read The Dark Star, the story of a look-alike taking the place of the president, kind of loosely based on either Abraham Lincoln or, um, oh, come on, the guy who made airplanes, lived in a hotel in Las Vegas and reportedly didn't even trim his fingernails. There were rumors that he'd been replaced by a look-alike. I can't come up with the name. It's on the tip of my brain. He made the Spruce Goose. Yes, Howard Hughes. Thank you, Tim. Oh, boy. Yeah. Well, anyway, I read it in order to do a book report for an English class in ninth grade. I read it because it was short and easy to read. Uh, I didn't remember the author's name. Phil would talk about all these famous science fiction writers, and I had no clue. Frank Herbert, Harry Harrison. I kind of knew the name Heinlein, sort of, but not really. I, of course, had heard of Arthur C. Clarke because of the movie 2001, and I had read some of Clarke's nonfiction, and of course, Isaac Asimov's nonfiction. In fact, when I was in ninth grade, the school librarian, maybe I was in 10th. Anyway, she um, pulled out this boxed set of the Foundation trilogy and told me to read it. She was also one of the teachers, so I obeyed. I read it. It was interesting. But I was focused on nonfiction, math and physics. My major in high school was a double major, math and physics. I think Roog was the first story Phil sold, but another story was published first. I forget which one that was. Oh, and when I read The Father Thing, another one of Phil's stories, it was ripped off for a movie, Body Snatchers. Invasion of the Body Snatchers ripped off Phil's story and another author's novel, and they got away with it. I forget the novel or the author, but there was a lawsuit over the novel, and the author lost. I did watch science fiction movies. That was the days of television. We were in the Los Angeles metro area, so we had more than the three networks. We had 2, 4, and 7 were the networks, and then 5, 9, 11, and 13 were the local stations. We didn't have UHF, so I couldn't watch Sesame Street because it was on 28. Our set didn't receive the UHF channels. Mom never bought a TV. She just waited till her parents gave her their old one. It was black and white. There was lots of color programming, but we saw it in black and white. The two things I watched the most were Dark Shadows and Doctor Who. And the Doctor Who at the time I watched the series was the fourth Doctor, I think, Tom Baker. I didn't know there were I didn't really know there were other doctors. I just assumed he was the only one. And Dark Shadows, of course, had vampires and werewolves. It was a soap opera, and Doctor Who was kind of soapy. Cora, don't climb on my back. I don't like that. Come on, let go of me. Ow! Don't climb on my back. And you fix that face. Don't you do the predator face. I'll pound you flat. Yes, I will. I'll pound you flat. I think she wants a can of food. Okay, let's feed the kitty so she won't try to eat me. Hang on, I got your fancy feast. Yeah. Oh, we do prefer crispy. All right, come on. It's chicken and liver flavor. Yes, dear. Hang on. We'll come out of the can too easily. This one. There. Oh, cats. Yep, she wanted food in the middle of the night. Well, the mommy was up and awake, so it was time for her fancy feast. Okay, wow, we're well over 2 hours now. Well, Phil had read all kinds of classics that I never even heard of, and I'm still searching for the list he wrote of books that I should read. It was some time before I got around to actually reading them. Mostly reading them in college classes where they were assigned, and I learned by going to school that I didn't understand those novels in the context of when they were written and who was reading them. I gotta check the faucet, it's leaking. Yeah, I hadn't quite shut off the water in the sink. Now it's off. Anyway, I kind of like my own interpretation, but it's like Phil's exegesis, it's really eisegesis, interpreting what I read in my own context, not the context of the author and his original readers. And most of the authors of the classics were men because it took so long for the public to accept that women could write too. Now, if they wrote romances where women had to get married, that was one thing. But the public had trouble accepting a woman as a serious novelist addressing the issues that men, being more serious and less flighty, addressed in their work. For example, the original readers of Charles Dickens' novels laughed at the plight of the poor, like Oliver Twist. I had read David Copperfield. I don't see how you could laugh at that one. It's very serious. But in the end, David Copperfield, having lost his mother, I don't remember whether he married her, either wife or fiance, and um, watching people around him just fail and end up in abject poverty or prison. At the end, you see, he's been suicidal the whole time, and at the end, he realizes that he has survived because he's stronger than these other people. And as much as he cares about them, they are weak and he can only help them so much. They've got to learn to take care of themselves or fail. I need chocolate. Now, I realize it's been quite a while since someone mentioned chocolate, but it just hit me that I have chocolate. Okay, it's just Hershey's, not the good stuff, but Kraft has ruined the Cadbury chocolate. When they bought the company, it went downhill, and I'm not really happy with the truffles from, oh, can't remember the brand name. They're to die for, but many of their flavors just don't do it for me. All right, chocolate. Are you happy, Tora? You gonna quit chewing on the mommy? Her dish wasn't empty, but it was only kibble. When I first got Tora and I opened a can of cat food, she didn't seem to know what it was. She just looked up at me like, well, where's my kibble? And for the most part, she won't eat people food. If I have a steak or a slice of ham, she'll eat 2 or 3 bites and then she's done. But she'll insist upon inspecting my food, but she doesn't eat it. Yes, dear. Oh, time out of joint is rather Gnostic, by the way. Getting back to our main topic. Um, Regal Gum finds the objects in his world turning into words written on slips of paper. I'm smoking too much. Main reason is I can't really afford cigarettes. I was cutting down, but this craziness with the virus is stressful. Now, I don't mind too much. I am a bit of a hermit, but there's so many things that are not available to me because of the stinking virus. Now, there really is a virus, but it isn't the disaster that they predicted. And yeah, avoiding contact with other people is somewhat helpful, but by the time we started that, the virus had been circulating for several months. We just didn't know about it. It might have been here as early as last October, but we didn't know. People who got sick thought they had the flu, and it was a particularly nasty strain of the flu, but it was the flu. Oh, Tora has discovered the housefly. Don't knock over my lamp. I might have to turn off the lamp or turn on another light to encourage the fly to go somewhere else. Where is that thing? Dang. Ceiling light works on a remote control, which I keep losing. There. Here. All right. Now you can see my hexagonal clock, which needs a battery. It runs off a little AA battery, and it uses up the battery very quickly. Yeah, you can go get the fly now. All right, let's turn on this lamp and see if the fly will come here. There you go. You can knock over that lamp, okay? Kitty cats. She's she's a little hunter. Go get the fly, Tora. There's one fly in this house, and in my experience, if there's one fly in the house, it will land on my head. So I'm better off sitting in the dark. Okay, so Regal Gum, Time Out of Joint, a title taken from Hamlet. After his father tells him that he was murdered, the ghost of his father, Hamlet turns to his friend Horatio and says, "The time is out of joint." Well, it isn't just time that's out of joint. Regal Gum is sort of he's in a fake world that the authorities are using because he can figure out where the alien spaceships are. They're at war. and he's helping them to track the enemy spaceships so they can shoot them down. That idea has been borrowed for things like The Truman Show, where it's kind of they're just using his life for entertainment. Tora the fly isn't there. Honest, it isn't. Maybe if I turn off the ceiling light, the fly will go to the floor lamp and Tora can hunt it down. Tora is a little tiger. That's what her name means in Japanese. Oh, I can't see if she's there. No, she left. Good. See, I have a little table lamp. I don't want her knocking that over. Ooh, the spooky. Anyway, Phil did have the impression that aliens from other planets do visit us. And they just might look just like us. Kind of like that movie We Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper and the sunglasses that allow him to see what the aliens really look like. I don't have any flies for you, Tora, honest. Get off my back. All right, it's time to bring out the big guns. The squirt bottle. Oh, you're gonna play that game, huh? Get off my chair, it's mine. You can sit on my lap. Tora is playing the role of the person from Porlock when Coleridge was composing his poem about Kublai Khan. In Xanadu did Kublai Khan. Oh, jeez. A something decree. I used to know it. I used to have it memorized. A stately pleasure dome decree. That's it. Well, anyway, he had it all worked out in his head. Now, there weren't any computers or thank you, Tim. Uh, uh, there weren't any computers or even typewriters. He was writing with a quill pen that you dip in the bottle of ink. Well, this person came to the door and asked for directions to the town of Porlock. And Coleridge told him how to get there, and then he went back and sat down to write his poem, and he couldn't remember it. Tora, don't eat my jacket either. All right. Squirting her with water didn't work. How about this? Oh, yeah, the pretty red light. The red dot. Get it. It's got your mouth, see? Cats. So she's the person from Porlock, Tora. Cats do tend to be nocturnal. Going to a wedding? Who's going to a wedding? Tim? Oh, the person from Porlock was going to a wedding? Well, Robert Heinlein used to tell that story as a justification. When he was writing, um, he would turn off the telephone and refuse to answer the door because he could not afford to be interrupted while he was writing. And one time he used to boast, see, he had a gated property. It was surrounded by a concrete wall with those wrought iron spikes on top, and it had an electric gate with a little intercom. And one time, the IRS came to the gate, and Heinlein refused to let them in. He said, "You'll have to make an appointment." And the agent said, "Well, we tried to call you, but you didn't answer the phone." And Heinlein said, "That's because I'm writing." All right, Tora, I think Tim said you're adorable. You're an adorable pest. Yeah, get the pretty red dot. It's got the refrigerator. It's got your mousey. It's got your paws. Ooh. I make these sounds like and kitty, 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 so that when I want to call her, she'll actually come because she thinks there's a pretty red dot to chase. It's it's at least as fascinating as a housefly. Anyway, yeah, we got to know the Heinleins, Robert and Ginny, primarily through letters. Um, but I met him at a Nebula Awards ceremony. Phil had been nominated for Cats. I can't come up with the title. Anyway, that novel about androids had already been published as a serial in a magazine, so it wasn't really eligible. Yeah, Asimov lived in a hotel in New York. He could isolate himself when he was writing. Anyway, then it was really a novella, a short novel or long story. Had the word living in the title, something like that. Anyway, it had been published in a prior year as a serial in a magazine, so it wasn't really eligible. And Phil didn't want to go, so he sent me, and I went with some people. I think Paul Williams might have been one of them, but I didn't really know anybody that well, so I don't remember for sure. And Phil had heard that Robert Heinlein wanted to talk to him, and Phil was afraid that Heinlein was angry with him over something. Well, I didn't know what Heinlein looked like. But fortunately, Heinlein accepted the award for Arthur C. Clarke because Clarke couldn't leave Sri Lanka. He would lose his status as a permanent resident there if he left. So That's how I knew who Heinlein was. I saw him introduced, and I introduced, sometime later, I introduced myself to Heinlein, and he said, "Oh, do you think Phil would sign some books for me?" I said, "Sure." And he went up to his hotel room and got this cardboard box full of copies of Phil's books, which Phil later signed and mailed to Robert Heinlein. He was a fan. Amazing. And Heinlein was not the cold, uncaring, super radical conservative that people thought he was. He was actually somewhat liberal. And his wife, Ginny, too. They were very nice people. They just liked their privacy. Heinlein designed his house himself. It was shaped like a stop sign, an octagon. And he complained that he didn't have as many electrical outlets as he wanted because of the cost, not of installing the outlets, but of having a city inspector approve each one individually. Now, I never actually read Stranger in a Strange Land. Of course, I've heard about it and I kind of know the plot, sort of. Just not my thing. But I do love some of Heinlein's work. I read The Door into Summer, and this is not a spoiler, but the protagonist has a cat, and the cat likes to go outside, but when it's winter and there's snow, the cat doesn't want to go out, so he keeps trying different doors to see if there's a door into summer. Got the word grok into the dictionary, yeah. But I love that novel for the depiction of the cat. Heinlein, I visited them once. They had this huge, huge cat, an orange tabby with a lot of white. And I mean huge. He was bigger than a Chihuahua, bigger than a Yorkie. Big cat. He must have weighed 30 pounds or more. And the sweetest cat. Anyway, yeah, they were very nice people. And they bailed us out when the first time I did our income taxes, we had not paid anything in, and it turned out we owed a whole bunch of money. Over $2,000, which back then was, well, our rent on a 3-bedroom house was 300. So that was like, oh, maybe about 10 months rent, between 8 and 10 months rent. I forget the exact amount of that we owed. It was over 2,000 and under 3,000. They lent it to us and wouldn't accept any interest when we paid them back. Anyway, that was a long time ago. Another world. I had never lived in an apartment before I met Phil. We had, no matter how poor my family was, we always lived in a house. Apartments were for young couples who didn't have any children yet, and elderly couples whose children were grown and gone, but mostly young couples just starting out. So it was quite an adjustment. The biggest thing was no garden. So when we got the apartment on Cameo Lane, which had a balcony, we called it the catio, the patio for the cat. I got a little redwood box and tried to plant some things. Didn't work out too well. The marigolds did well, but some kind of bug ate all the cabbage that I planted. Marigolds are supposed to keep the bugs away. Anyway, then we finally rented a house. I had noticed a house for rent down the block from our regular babysitter, but I didn't say anything because I figured Phil would say no. And then one time when Phil picked up our little boy from the babysitter, he saw the house for rent. And so we rented it. And I had gardens, but they were already fully planted. There was really no room to plant anything of my own. But it was nice. It was more familiar to me to live in a house. But it was $300 a month. Our apartment had been, I think it was either 150 or 175. We were struggling. But Phil fired his agent, Scott Meredith. Once a year, he had the option to end his relationship with the agency. So he wrote to them and said he was exercising that option and firing them. Next thing you know, they sent him about $10,000 in royalties that he probably should have gotten much earlier. So he unfired them. And we bought a little sports car. And there's all these rumors that it was a brand new something or other. It was an old Fiat. I think it cost about $1,400. It was a cute little car, a two-seater with a luggage rack in the back, not a seat, a luggage rack. It was convertible, but we never took the top down. Uh, just, it was a nice little car, but it really spent a lot of time in the shop. And I ended up selling it when it needed a new carburetor because the carburetor would have cost me more than the car was worth. It had a Weber dual carburetor. At the time, it was close to $1,000 for the carburetor, and we'd paid $1,400 for the car and driven it for 2 years. But it was a cute little car and fun to drive. And it was really good on gas. Gasoline had gone up because of the oil shortage. It had gone up to 75 cents a gallon. I didn't know if I could afford that. Those were the days. Well, anyway, when Phil wrote his fiction, there are Gnostic elements. And when he developed his exegesis, there are Gnostic elements. But he always reverts to the idea of a savior, of God saving us on this planet, in this life, or an afterlife in which we have bodies that just don't age, don't get old and die. That the whole earth will be like the Garden of Eden. And at one time it might have been. When dinosaur fossils are found, the scientists tend to date them by how deeply they're buried, and in some cases by measuring radioactive elements and how much they've decayed. But it seems more likely, because predator and prey are buried together and they tend to be in caves. If not in caves, then at least up high, the highest place they could find at the time, like on hills and mountains. It seems to me most likely that they died together in a gigantic flood and they were stampeding, trying to get away from the water. And some got buried deeper than others. And I think human beings like us really did see dinosaurs. They called them dragons. Now, some of the more recent stories of dragons turn out to be crocodiles or other reptiles that were unfamiliar before the modern age of travel and television and internet and all that. People had never seen a crocodile. Back in the good old days, I don't know how good they were, but cottage industry was a thing. And that's what this virus thing is killing. People made things in their homes and took them to town once a week to sell them. Or they traded among themselves. One woman would weave cloth and trade it to another woman for some fruits or vegetables. People didn't have a lot of money. A penny was money. Now I find pennies just dropped on the street or the sidewalk, even nickels and dimes sometimes. Well, today we have small business and home business. It's basically cottage industry, and those are the most severely shut down businesses in an attempt to stop the spread of this virus. And apparently the virus is not all that bad, but they do claim that a new strain has developed which is much more virulent, much more contagious. But I'm not sure that means it's much more deadly. You know, I can go shop with 200 of my closest friends at Costco, but I can't go to church even with social distancing. We can't, for example, have 10 or fewer people at a time in the church. We can't even have one person in the church except the pastor all by himself. So he does his sermons on the internet, Facebook, Facebook videos. He's being dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. I think he's younger than I am, but something of a Luddite. Oh, we're getting close to 3 hours here, and I'm winding down. I might be able to get in a few more hours of sleep. You never know. Anyway, it's been fun. It's been real. A hippie classic, Stranger in a Strange Land. Ah, well, one more cigarette won't hurt. Coffee cup is almost empty, so is the tea. And I think I'm running out of water again. Yep, I'll stay a few more minutes, but I'll need water. Fly went out to the kitchen and Tora hasn't noticed. Well, oh, let's see. Oh, the cosmic puppets, in which people discover that they're the pawns in a game, a battle between, guess what? The Lord of Light and the Lord of Darkness. Very early Philip K. Dick novel. The Cosmic Puppets, totally Zoroastrian, not Gnostic. I believe it involves a man going to his old hometown only to discover that everything has been changed. It isn't the same. It was based on a short story that Phil published, but I've forgotten the name of the story. Oh, Tim likes Deus Erie. Oh, yeah, Phil's co-author was Roger Zelazny. I need light to use the keyboard. Roger Zelazny. Yeah, that's how that book survived the invasion of Phil's home in November 1971. They took all his manuscripts, but Phil had sent the manuscript of Deus Erie to Roger Zelazny, his co-author, so it survived. They took the manuscript of a novel he had just started writing. It was not completed. And Phil didn't have any more copies, just the original and the carbon copy, and they took both of them. So Phil never wrote that book. But he had finished writing Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, and he had sent the carbon copy to his divorce lawyer to hold on to for him because Phil was a little paranoid and he thought something might happen to it. He was right, but he had the carbon copy, so that book got published. And people thought that Phil was not writing, that he burned out his brains with drugs and couldn't write. Well, he hadn't published anything. Bio movie, but he'd been writing. Yeah, there was an attempt at a biopic uh, called The Owl in Daylight, but it kind of fizzled. There are some biopics about Phil's life. Um, the one I like the best is The Penultimate Truth About Philip K. Dick. Very good one. I'm not impressed with the one the BBC made. For one thing, they treated me like dirt. They said to meet at Coco's, a local restaurant. Well, I went a few minutes earlier than the time they gave me. And when I got there, they'd finished eating and they didn't even offer to buy me a cup of coffee. They just all got up from the table and said, let's go. And then, well, in the correspondence, first by letter, then by email, they wanted to film me in my kitchen. And I refused. I made them film me at the university where I was teaching. So they settled for the cafeteria. I didn't want to admit to them that I didn't have a kitchen. I was homeless. I was living in my car and getting a Motel 6 room on Saturdays so I could take a bath and get all cleaned up. Also, I had a key to the restroom at work, so that helped. But I wasn't about to admit to them that I didn't have a home. None of their business. I just declined being filmed in my kitchen. The BBC Arena series, their uh, episode about Phil's life was okay, but But The Penultimate Truth About Philip K. Dick is really good. And they focus on an FBI investigation of Philip K. Dick. And I'm not sure it was the FBI, but there was some government agency investigating him. He really did have enemies, and he was paranoid about it. Well, who wouldn't be? It had to do with the Nixon administration. Phil was right about that. He was probably on one of Nixon's lengthy enemies lists. But the real incident that ignited the whole searching his house thing probably goes to a phone call he got from a hotel room in Canada where John Lennon and Yoko Ono were having a bed-in for peace. Dr. Timothy Leary happened to be there, and he spoke to Phil on the phone and said he was a big fan. The journalist Paul Williams had given copies of The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch to Dr. Leary and John Lennon, and they had read some of his other books too. But that particular novel is about psychedelic drugs. And then, sometime after that phone call with Leary, less than a year later, Leary escaped from prison where he was being held on drug charges. And I think Nixon's Drug Enforcement Administration just happened to come across a record of that phone call and connected Phil with this escaped most dangerous man in America, Dr. Timothy Leary. This escaped prisoner. And I think that's why on November 17th, 1971, Phil's house was ransacked. And they took bank records, tax records, manuscripts of his books. Kind of looks like a government operation, not drug dealers or normal burglars. They even tossed all the food onto the kitchen floor, everything in the cupboards, everything in the refrigerator. Probably looking for drugs. So I think it was the DEA. And I think it's because of Dr. Leary. Yeah, the CIA. We can thank the CIA too for both heroin and meth addiction in the inner cities. It seems like they want to destroy poor people, especially if they happen to be people of color. And in the meantime, they use the profits to provide guns to terrorists so we can, live our lives in fear because there's terrorists with guns. This world is screwed up, and the CIA needs to be abolished. Its original purpose was simply to gather and collate intelligence gathered by other agencies. And now they deal in drugs and they have death squads. And they can deny it because those aren't CIA agents. Yeah, but they're contractors who work for the CIA. Now, Phil almost certainly was given what we call a date rape drug, when he was in Vancouver, British Columbia. He was pulled off the street into the back of a black limousine and interrogated by two men in black suits. And the next thing he knew, well, he didn't quite remember that. He remembered walking down to the drugstore to get some aspirin for a headache. And his next memory was sitting on the floor of his apartment having swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. He concluded that he had tried to kill himself because there's the empty water glass and the empty pill bottle, but he didn't remember doing it. So he called for help, and he got help, and he survived. But he was shattered. When I came to meet him down in Orange County, he was in pain and frightened. I don't think he ever quite trusted me. Shame. Really a shame. Oh my God, we're at 3 hours. I really have to at least try to get a little sleep. It's Sunday morning and it's Mother's Day. I bet my son calls me. He always does. He's a good man. My little boy grew up. He's very much like his father, but he isn't injured and in pain and fear the way his dad was. We both worked very hard to make sure our son had a good life. Not spoiled, but good. And he's a good man. And I'm actually getting a little sleepy. Yeah, the CIA is evil. And Phil most often thought it was the CIA that messed with him, but I suspect it was really the Drug Enforcement Administration trying to find out who helped Dr. Leary escape from prison. Well, it was probably the Weathermen, a radical group, and they were probably paid to do it by friends of Dr. Leary. But Phil didn't have any money. He couldn't pay for anything. He managed to sell his house rather than have it foreclosed, but he didn't really get much money out of it. What he got was his remaining possessions put into storage, and the mortgage loan paid off, especially since the house had been smashed up. It wasn't really worth a whole lot. And that wasn't the only burglary of his house. It was just the most vicious one. Well, yeah, Leary escaped alone, but who provided him with civilian clothes to change into, and who drove him away so that the search parties couldn't find him? He did slide down a cable that was over higher than the fence around the minimum security prison, but he had help once he got over the fence. They found Leary's prison clothes in the restroom of a nearby gas station. Someone gave him civilian clothes. And they couldn't find him because he hopped into a car and they drove him away. And he ended up in Europe as a sort of celebrity, touring Europe. And yeah, the local authorities were already suspicious of Phil because so many young people hung around his house. Well, Nancy's younger brother Michael was still living with Phil after Nancy moved out, and those were his friends, Michael's friends. And yeah, they did drugs, but Phil wasn't selling them drugs. If anything, he was buying drugs. And while I was with Phil, he would smoke a joint if someone offered it to him, but he wasn't into pills. He had to take pills for his high blood pressure, but other than that, he wouldn't take aspirin for a headache. Of course, after his oral surgery, he did double up on the pain pills they gave him because he was in pain. And the same after he had surgery on his shoulder because it kept dislocating. He had injured it in a car accident years earlier. But he was actually in real pain. And I'm sure that the pain pills for the oral surgery had something to do with his first visions, but they don't explain the content. They only explain that he was hallucinating. I believe that someone was transmitting radio or microwave signals that Phil was able to pick up because of the oral surgery. He'd had a really bad tooth extracted. He called it a wisdom tooth, but I know where that tooth was. It was here. Wisdom tooth would be farther back. It was a molar that had broken while he was eating, and it was terribly infected. So he had penicillin and pain pills afterward. But really, his story of how the fish sign hit him with a pink beam and all that is highly exaggerated, embellished, and even made up. He knew what the fish sign was. He had bought a bumper sticker at a local Berean bookstore and taped that sticker in our window. It was a fish sign. And he had already explained to me that it was an early symbol of the secret Christians. So, yes, the lady from the pharmacy had a gold necklace with a fish sign. And he did ask her about it, and she did tell him it's a Christian symbol. Oh, and by the way, she was blonde. He keeps describing her as dark haired. No, she was blonde, and she did exist, and she did work at the pharmacy. But Phil was a storyteller, and he made everything more dramatic than it actually was. I think he was developing a novel about that experience. And what do you know? There's the Valis trilogy. And by the way, the transmigration of Timothy Archer does not belong in the trilogy. It's sort of a postscript to the real trilogy, which includes Radio Free Albemuth. But the people in charge of his literary estate didn't know about Radio Free Albemuth. So, in order to make a trilogy, they stuck in Timothy Archer. It's more of a religious novel. But Radio Free Albemuth was the first Valis novel that Phil wrote. And I can't believe his publishers didn't want it, but they didn't. They didn't want Valis or Divine Invasion either. But the trilogy should start with Radio Free Albemuth, and then Valis should be in the middle, and it should end with the Divine Invasion, which introduces religion more uh, overtly. And then Timothy Archer makes a nice postscript to the trilogy. Oh, and I better talk about the hernia. Phil has a frantic trip to the emergency room in the middle of the night. It didn't happen. One time, one afternoon, Phil took a lot of naps. He really was physically ill. He would cancel things because he had what he called the flu. And so he took a lot of naps and he didn't sleep well at night. He'd get up and start typing things because he couldn't sleep. Anyway, he got up one afternoon, walked out to the living room, and he did appear to be in a trance. And he just said, "Our son has an inguinal hernia. Call the doctor and tell him." So I did. It made sense to me, but I have no clue as to how Phil could know that. He had changed a diaper once in 2 years. Well, not quite 2 years. Well, eventually, but at that time our son was 14 months old. So I made an appointment with the doctor, and he confirmed a couple days later that our son did indeed have an inguinal hernia. And he referred us to a specialist. So about a week later, we saw the specialist, and he said, "Yes, we can do surgery to correct the hernia, but we can't do it till your son is at least 18 months old." So for 4 months, we had to make sure that baby was not allowed to cry, because his crying, which was really screaming, could cause the hernia to strangulate, and that could be life-threatening. So we really didn't get any sleep for 4 months until our son had the surgery. No emergency room, no driving to the hospital in the middle of the night. And the way Phil describes it, he says that the hernia popped the hydrocele. He even spelled it wrong. A hydrocele is a little fluid-filled ball that sometimes forms. It doesn't belong there. He had two hydroceles that had to be removed during the surgery to correct his hernia. Now, I don't know how Phil got it that messed up, but he did. It's a cyst. A hydrocele is a cyst. Now, Phil had had a hernia once. He'd been playing tennis with his wife, Anne, and that either when he found out that he had the hernia or when it actually formed, but it was in his side, in his abdomen. Just one of the muscles across the belly kind of split apart. Not at all the kind of hernia Christopher had. But I should have known. I didn't put it together till afterward that one of my brothers had a hernia similar to that when he was very young. And he had it corrected when he was 9 years old. But, hindsight is 2020. Anyway, it's 3:15 in the morning, so I guess it's time to wind this up. I'm so glad that I was able to get on YouTube during the day. On the weekends, at least, it just won't let me in. They run out of bandwidth. So maybe I'll try Monday or some other weekday instead of weekends. Okay, and thank you all for listening. Let's see, I gotta type that. And I'll be back when time and energy allow. Good night and sleep well. Yes, I want to end it.